crash and the consequence. Marcus Chin had precisely 12 seconds to realize his reconnaissance mission was about to become a career-ending disaster before his ship's navigation system exploded in a cascade of sparking components. The blast threw him forward against his restraints as every alarm in the cockpit screamed warnings he already understood with painful clarity. He was going down and going down hard. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Recon 7 Delta," Marcus transmitted on every frequency his dying communications array could manage. "Experiencing catastrophic system failure. Position unknown. Attempting emergency landing." Static answered him. The electromagnetic storm he had been mapping moments earlier had intensified with impossible speed, turning from a scientific curiosity into a roiling mass of energy that clawed at his ship like something alive and angry. Marcus fought the controls as his vessel tumbled through layers of atmosphere he hadn't even known were there, the view screen showing glimpses of a planet that shouldn't exist according to every chart he carried. The planetary surface rushed toward him with terrible inevitability. Marcus redirected what little power remained to the emergency thrusters, managing to convert his death plunge into merely a catastrophic crash. The ship screamed across an alien landscape, tearing through vegetation that glowed with bioluminescence, before finally slamming into something solid enough to stop his momentum. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of venting atmosphere and the groan of tortured metal. Marcus ran a mental inventory through the ringing in his ears. Legs functional, arms responding, ribs probably cracked but not punctured, head still attached. He had survived worse during his military training, though not by much. He triggered the emergency release on his restraints and fell forward, catching himself with hands that shook only slightly. The ship was a total loss. Marcus could see that immediately as he stumbled through the destroyed cockpit. His emergency beacon was offline, crushed in the initial impact. His communications array had melted into slag. Even his basic navigation equipment was displaying error messages in 3 languages simultaneously, which he recognized as the universal sign that expensive technology had become expensive scrap metal. He grabbed his survival pack from its secured compartment, checking its contents with the automatic efficiency of someone who had trained for this exact scenario. Water reclamator, emergency rations, medical supplies, basic tools, and his service pistol with 2 spare charge packs. Not much for survival on an unknown planet, but Marcus had worked with less. The exit hatch required manual override, which meant 20 minutes of struggling with bent metal and stubborn mechanisms before Marcus finally forced it open. He emerged into alien twilight that took his breath away. 3 moons hung in a purple sky, casting overlapping shadows across a landscape that seemed pulled from fever dreams. The vegetation absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating pools of darkness between patches of bioluminescent growth. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth, their peaks crowned with structures too regular to be natural. Marcus checked his suit's environmental readings. Atmosphere was breathable, temperature manageable, no immediate toxic threats detected. He looked at the wreckage of his ship, then at those distant structures. Staying with the crash site was standard protocol, but standard protocol assumed someone knew where to look for him. Given that his navigational data had been wiped and he had no idea what planet he had crashed on, staying put seemed like a slower way to die than seeking shelter. The trek toward the mountains took 3 hours of careful navigation through terrain that seemed designed to impede human movement. Thorn plants caught at his flight suit. Strange sounds echoed from the darkness between glowing patches. Twice, Marcus saw movement that suggested predators large enough to consider him prey. His hand stayed near his pistol, though he knew his limited charge packs meant he couldn't afford to waste shots. As he drew closer, the structures revealed themselves to be far more impressive than initial distance had suggested. This wasn't merely architecture. Someone had carved entire sections of mountain into a palace complex that caught the moonlight and transformed it into cascading patterns of silver and violet. Towers rose from stone foundations, connected by bridges that seemed too delicate to support their own weight yet had clearly stood for centuries. Windows glowed with internal light, suggesting active habitation. Marcus approached cautiously, his military training warring with his desperate need for help. The main entrance was sealed, its doors covered with symbols his universal translator struggled to parse. But the palace was ancient and massive, which meant there would be other ways inside. He circled the perimeter until he found what looked like a service entrance, its door slightly ajar as if someone had forgotten to secure it properly. He slipped inside, finding himself in corridors that spoke of wealth and culture far beyond human achievement. The walls were lined with metals that shifted color as he passed. Artwork depicting star charts and historical scenes covered every surface. The air carried scents he couldn't identify, something between jasmine and ozone, thick with a quality that made his translator implant hum softly in his skull. Marcus moved through the palace with the silence of someone trained for infiltration, though his goal was contact rather than stealth. He passed chambers filled with technology that hummed with dormant power, their purposes mysterious but their craftsmanship extraordinary. Libraries stretched into shadows, their contents preserved behind crystalline barriers. Everything spoke of a civilization that had achieved wonders while humanity was still figuring out agriculture. He found signs of recent habitation, quarters clearly occupied, chambers showing evidence of daily use. But the palace seemed strangely empty, its inhabitants either absent or gathered elsewhere. Marcus pressed deeper, looking for anything resembling a communications room or control center, somewhere he might signal for help or at least understand where he had crashed. The corridor opened into a residential wing that felt distinctly different from the formal spaces he had traversed. Here, the architecture became more intimate, the decorations more personal. Tapestries showed pastoral scenes rather than historical battles. Doors were carved with individual symbols rather than official seals. And one door, larger than the others and marked with a crown symbol his translator insisted meant sovereign, stood partially open with soft light spilling through the gap. Marcus hesitated. His training said to keep moving, to avoid confrontation. But that light meant someone was inside, someone who might be able to help him contact coalition forces or at least explain where he was. He moved to the door, raising his hand to knock, when a sound from within stopped him. Music, delicate and haunting, played on instruments he didn't recognize. And beneath it, the soft splash of water. Without thinking, operating on the assumption that anyone bathing was likely not a threat and might even be willing to help a stranded pilot, Marcus pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The chamber beyond stole his ability to form coherent thoughts. A pool set into the floor caught the light of 3 moons streaming through crystal skylights, transforming the water into liquid silver. Steam rose in gentle spirals, carrying that jasmine ozone scent he had noticed earlier. And standing in that pool, water streaming down skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner radiance, was a woman whose beauty transcended species. She was tall by human standards, her form graceful in ways that suggested both strength and elegance. Her skin held a luminescence that reminded Marcus of pearls, pale and lustrous. Her hair fell in waves of deepest black shot through with strands that caught light like fiber optics. And her ears rose to elegant points that marked her as distinctly non-human. But what caught Marcus's attention, what held him frozen in the doorway, were her eyes. They glowed with soft violet light, and in that moment, they were fixed on him with an expression of absolute horror. Time seemed to stop. Marcus's brain attempted to process multiple realizations simultaneously. He had just walked in on someone bathing. That someone was clearly important based on the luxury of her chambers. She was stunningly beautiful in a way that transcended cultural boundaries. And he had just committed what was obviously a massive violation of privacy and possibly protocol. Then she moved, fast as thought, wrapping herself in robes that seemed to appear from nowhere while speaking in a voice that carried both command and genuine distress. The words were in a language his translator scrambled to interpret, but the tone needed no translation. She was horrified, angry, and frightened in equal measure. Marcus raised his hands in the universal gesture of surrender, words tumbling out. "I'm so sorry. I crashed. I was looking for help. I didn't mean to intrude. I didn't know anyone was in here." His translator finally caught up with her language, feeding him words that made his blood run cold. "You have witnessed the sacred chamber ritual. Do you understand what you have done? Do you know what this means?" "I honestly have no idea," Marcus said, maintaining his hands-up position while trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "But I'm guessing from your reaction that it's bad. I apologize profusely. If you could just point me toward a communication terminal, I'll leave immediately and we can pretend this never happened." Her glowing eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him forget to breathe. "Pretend it never happened? You are an outsider who has witnessed an empress in her sacred bonding ritual. By the ancient laws of Valthera, you must join with the royal bloodline or we both face exile to the death zones. There is no pretending this never happened." Marcus felt the words hit him like physical blows. "Empress? Sacred ritual? Join the bloodline?" His mind raced through the implications. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" She stepped from the pool, her robes settling around her with liquid grace, her posture shifting from vulnerable to regal in the span of a heartbeat. "I am Lyria, Empress of Valthera, Guardian of the 3 Moons, Keeper of the Ancient Wisdom. And you, whoever you are, have just triggered a law that has stood for 10,000 years. We must undergo the bonding ceremony within 3 planetary rotations, or we will both be stripped of all protection and cast out to die. There are no exceptions. There are no appeals. Marcus lowered his hands slowly, his military training helping him process this impossible situation with the same calm he would apply to any tactical nightmare. My name is Marcus Chin, Lieutenant in the Coalition Reconnaissance Division. I crashed on your planet approximately 4 hours ago after experiencing catastrophic system failure. I had no idea this planet was inhabited. I certainly had no intention of witnessing any sacred rituals. And I'm fairly certain that marriage wasn't on my mission parameters. Lyria studied him with those luminous eyes, and Marcus saw her expression shift through several emotions too quickly for him to identify. Finally she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Valthera Prime is under Coalition quarantine. No ships are permitted within our system. How did you get here? I was mapping an electromagnetic anomaly in the adjacent sector when it suddenly intensified. My ship was pulled off course and severely damaged. I crashed before I could correct my trajectory. I didn't even know there was a planet here until I was already in your atmosphere. Marcus met her gaze steadily. I'm not a spy or an invader. I'm just a pilot who had very bad luck. Bad luck, Lyria repeated, and something that might have been bitter amusement flickered across her face. You describe accidentally witnessing the most sacred private ritual of our culture as bad luck. You have no idea what you've done. What this means for both of us. Then explain it to me, Marcus said. Because from where I'm standing, this seems like a massive overreaction to an honest mistake. I didn't see anything intentionally. I was looking for help, not entertainment. Surely there's a provision in your law for accidents. There is no provision for accidents. The law exists precisely because of its absoluteness. Lyria moved to a seating area, gesturing for him to follow with a motion that was both invitation and command. Sit. If we are to face this together, you should at least understand what you've triggered. Marcus sat, keeping a respectful distance, acutely aware that his flight suit was torn and stained while she looked like she had stepped from a portrait of divine rulers. I'm listening. Lyria settled into a chair that seemed to have been grown rather than built, her posture regal despite the circumstances. The Valtheri are an ancient people. We live for centuries, experiencing time in ways your shorter-lived species cannot fully comprehend. Our bonding rituals are not mere customs. They are sacred practices that connect us to our ancestors and our future. The chamber you entered is where imperial women perform the moonlight meditation, a ritual of spiritual preparation that has been private for 10 millennia. And I just walked into the middle of it, Marcus said, beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. In my culture that would be embarrassing. In yours it's apparently a capital offense. Not an offense. A binding. Lyria's eyes held his. When an outsider witnesses the sacred chamber ritual, it is considered a sign from the universe itself. The ancient law states that such a witness must join with the royal bloodline, becoming part of our legacy. The alternative is exile for both parties, cast out into the death zones where the predators you heard in the forest hunt without mercy. Marcus processed this information with the calm analysis his military training had instilled. So our options are forced marriage or mutual death sentence. That's quite a binary choice for a culture that's achieved faster than light travel. The law was written when we were far less advanced. It has never been challenged because it has never been violated. Until now. Lyria leaned forward slightly. You understand what this means for me? I am Empress. I have duties to my people, responsibilities that span decades of planning. I was not meant to bond with an outsider, especially not a human whose lifespan is barely a fraction of my own. And I'm a reconnaissance pilot who was supposed to map some electromagnetic readings and return to base for debriefing, Marcus countered. Instead, I'm crashed on a quarantined planet facing a choice between marrying someone I just met or being eaten by alien predators. Trust me, this is not in my mission parameters either. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of impossibility pressing down between them. Then Lyria did something unexpected. She laughed, a sound that held genuine amusement beneath the stress. A reconnaissance pilot. You map things for a living, and you couldn't read the symbols on my door that clearly indicated private chambers. In my defense, I can barely read the symbols on my own ship's control panels without the computer's help, Marcus said, and found himself almost smiling despite everything. I'm much better at crashing into things than reading ancient languages. Clearly. Lyria's expression softened slightly. What is your world like, Marcus Chin? Where do you come from? Earth. Third planet in the Sol system. Water world with too many governments and not enough common sense. Marcus leaned back, considering his words. I joined the military because I wanted to see what was beyond our little corner of space. Turns out the universe has a sense of humor about that kind of ambition. Earth, Lyria said thoughtfully. I have read about your world. Young, chaotic, but showing remarkable potential for a species that has only recently achieved interstellar capability. Your people are resilient, I understand. Adaptable in ways that longer-lived species sometimes are not. We're good at surviving impossible situations, Marcus agreed. It's kind of our specialty. Though this particular situation is testing even my capacity for adaptation. Lyria stood, moving to a window that overlooked the alien landscape bathed in triple moonlight. The ceremony must occur within 3 rotations. That gives us approximately 72 of your hours to prepare. The High Council will need to be notified. There will be political complications. Many of my advisors will oppose this union. Some may attempt to use it as grounds to challenge my authority. So we're not just dealing with ancient laws. We're dealing with politics. Marcus joined her at the window. In my experience, politics are more dangerous than any predator. Your experience is correct. Lyria turned to face him, and in the moonlight, she seemed almost otherworldly. I need to know something, Marcus Chin. If we go through with this bonding, if we satisfy the ancient law and navigate the political storms, what are your intentions? Will you attempt to use this position for personal gain? Will you try to influence Valtteri policy toward human interests? Marcus met her gaze steadily. I'm a lieutenant in reconnaissance. I have no political ambitions and no authority to negotiate anything on humanity's behalf. Honestly, I just want to survive this, figure out how to get a message to my command so they stop listing me as killed in action, and maybe not cause an interstellar incident. If marrying you accomplishes that without either of us dying horribly, then I can live with the arrangement. That's refreshingly honest, Lyria said. Most people in your position would be calculating advantages, considering how to exploit this situation. Most people in my position would probably be better at reading door signs, Marcus replied. I'm not a politician or a schemer. I'm just a pilot who's very good at getting into trouble and reasonably good at getting out of it. Right now, getting out of trouble means working with you rather than against you. Lyria studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt as if those glowing eyes were reading something deeper than his words. Finally she nodded. Very well. We will proceed with the bonding ceremony. I will notify the High Council and begin preparations. You will need to learn our customs, our protocols, and enough of our language to complete the ritual. It will not be easy. I crashed a military reconnaissance ship on a quarantined planet and accidentally proposed marriage to an empress by walking through the wrong door, Marcus said. I'm pretty sure easy stopped being an option somewhere around the hull breach. Then let us make the best of an impossible situation, Lyria said, extending her hand in a gesture that seemed both formal and tentative. Welcome to Valthera, Marcus Chin. I sincerely hope you survive the experience. Marcus took her hand, noting how her fingers were longer than human standard, how her skin felt warm despite its luminous appearance, how this moment was completely insane and somehow felt exactly right. I've survived worse odds. Though admittedly, most of those didn't involve diplomatic immunity or ancient marriage laws. You haven't seen the ceremony yet, Lyria said, and there was something in her expression that might have been amusement or might have been warning. It involves telepathic bonding, public witnessing, and approximately 8 hours of ritual that will test your endurance in ways military training has not prepared you for. 8 hours? Marcus blinked. Is there a condensed version for emergency situations? We'll do our best to minimize the ceremony given the circumstances. But some elements cannot be abbreviated without invalidating the entire bonding. Lyria released his hand and moved toward the door. Come. You need quarters, medical attention for those injuries you're trying to hide, and approximately 3 hours of sleep before we begin preparations in earnest. The palace guards will have already detected your presence. We should address that situation before they decide you're an assassin and respond accordingly. Marcus followed her into the corridor, his hand instinctively moving toward his holstered pistol before he forced himself to relax. Your guards are going to love me. My guards are going to want to execute you on principle, Lyria said matter-of-factly. I will need to invoke imperial authority to keep you alive long enough to complete the bonding. This will be complicated. Complicated is my middle name, Marcus said. Well, actually it's Alexander, but complicated should have been my middle name given how my life tends to go. Lyria glanced back at him, and for the first time since their disastrous meeting, she smiled fully. It transformed her face, making her seem less like an untouchable empress and more like someone who understood the absurdity of fate. Marcus Alexander Chin. The human who crashed into my life and triggered ancient laws through spectacular incompetence. I think we are going to have a very interesting future together, however long or short it may be. Here's hoping for long and boring rather than short and dramatic, Marcus replied, though something in his gut told him that hope was already lost. This situation was going to be anything but boring, and he was about to learn exactly how complex interstellar politics could become when ancient laws collided with crashed spaceships and accidental proposals. The corridor ahead glowed with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat, leading them deeper into a palace that had just become the most unlikely venue for a wedding in human history. Marcus Chin, reconnaissance pilot and professional survivor of impossible situations, followed an alien empress toward a future he couldn't have imagined even in his most creative mission briefings. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the palace walls, the electromagnetic storm that had brought him here continued to rage with unnatural intensity, as if the universe itself was paying attention to what came next. The bonding in the beginning. The palace guards materialized from shadows with the kind of precision that spoke of centuries of military tradition. They surrounded Marcus and Lyria in the corridor, their armor composed of the same light-absorbing material as the forest vegetation, making them seem like walking voids in humanoid form. Their weapons, crystalline constructs that hummed with barely contained energy, were pointed directly at Marcus's chest. The lead guard, distinguished by silver markings that crawled across his armor like living circuit patterns, spoke in rapid Valkyrie that Marcus's translator struggled to parse. The tone, however, needed no translation. This was a man who had found an intruder and was very much looking forward to eliminating the problem. Lyria stepped between Marcus and the weapons with the kind of casual authority that comes from absolute power. She spoke a single word, sharp and commanding, and every guard immediately lowered their weapons and dropped to one knee. The effect was so instantaneous that Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of it, this display of imperial power in the middle of what was essentially the galaxy's most awkward marriage proposal. This human is under my personal protection, Lyria continued in trade standard, presumably for Marcus's benefit. He will be residing in the guest quarters of the Western Tower. Any harm that comes to him will be considered a direct attack on my person. Is that understood? The lead guard rose, his posture radiating confusion and barely suppressed outrage. Your Majesty, this outsider has violated palace security. Protocol demands interrogation and detention until... Protocol, Lyria interrupted, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate, will defer to imperial decree. Commander Theron, you have served my family for 3 generations. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my judgment? Theron's luminous eyes, visible through his helmet's transparent faceplate, shifted between Lyria and Marcus. No, Your Majesty. But I have also never seen you extend protection to an unauthorized alien presence in the palace. The High Council will demand explanation. And they will receive one at the appropriate time. Lyria's tone softened slightly. I ask for your trust, old friend. Circumstances have occurred that invoke ancient law. This human and I are bound by forces older than your oath of service. Will you honor that, or must I find guards who remember that their loyalty is to the throne itself rather than their personal opinions? The threat was delivered with such elegant courtesy that it took Marcus a moment to recognize it as a threat at all. Theron evidently had no such difficulty. He bowed deeply, hand over his chest in what was clearly a gesture of submission and respect. The guard serves the throne, Your Majesty. Always. He straightened, then turned to Marcus with an expression that suggested he was memorizing every detail for a future reckoning. Welcome to the Imperial Palace, human. May your stay be enlightening. The guards departed as silently as they had arrived, melting back into shadows until only their absence remained. Lyria released a breath that suggested the confrontation had cost her more than her calm exterior had revealed. That went better than expected, she said, gesturing for Marcus to follow her down a branching corridor. Theron is traditional, but he's loyal. He won't move against you without cause. Others in the palace will be less restrained once word spreads of your presence. How long before word spreads? Marcus asked, falling into step beside her. It already has. Palace servants notice everything, and what they notice they share. Lyria guided him through an archway into a tower that spiraled upward into darkness. By morning, every member of the High Council will know that an outsider has entered the palace and that I have claimed you under imperial protection. They will draw conclusions, most of them incorrect, all of them politically inconvenient. They climbed stairs that seemed to adjust their height to accommodate Marcus's human stride, another example of the sophisticated technology woven seamlessly into ancient architecture. The tower walls were transparent in places, offering glimpses of the triple moon landscape and the glowing forest below. In the distance, Marcus could see lights from what might have been a city, or perhaps multiple settlements scattered across the valleys. "Tell me about your people," Marcus said, partly from genuine curiosity and partly to fill the silence with something other than his own growing anxiety about what he had gotten himself into. "You mentioned living for centuries. How long exactly?" "The average Valkyrie lifespan is approximately 800 of your years," Lyria replied, her tone taking on the quality of someone reciting familiar information. "I myself am in my second century. Still young by our standards, though I have been empress for 30 years following my mother's abdication." Marcus did the math and tried not to let his shock show. "You're over 100 years old? You barely look 30 by human standards. We age differently. Our cellular structure maintains stability far longer than yours." Lyria glanced at him, something unreadable in her expression. "It is one of the complications of this bonding. You will live perhaps another 60 or 70 years if you are fortunate. I will live 7 centuries beyond that. The law requires bonding, but it does not address the grief that comes when one partner exists in mortal time while the other measures life in epochs." The observation hit Marcus with unexpected weight. He had been so focused on surviving the immediate crisis that he hadn't considered the long-term implications. From Lyria's perspective, this forced marriage was not just politically inconvenient. It was a guaranteed tragedy, binding her to someone who would be gone in what amounted to an eye blink of her existence. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. "I didn't think about that aspect. This situation is costing you more than just political complications." Lyria stopped on the stairs, turning to face him fully. In the dim light filtering through the transparent walls, her luminous eyes seemed to hold depths of sadness that her composed exterior couldn't quite conceal. "You are the first person, human or Valkyrie, who has acknowledged that cost. My advisors will focus on politics and protocol. My guards will question security. But you, who stands to lose nothing in comparison, recognize what I must sacrifice." "I might be losing less time," Marcus said, "but I'm still losing my career, my freedom, and any chance at a normal life. We're both prisoners of this situation in different ways." "Perhaps." Lyria resumed climbing, but something in her posture had shifted, become less rigid. "Come. Your quarters are just ahead. We both need rest before tomorrow's preparations begin. The High Council meets at dawn, and I must present you before they hear distorted versions from other sources." The guest quarters turned out to be larger than Marcus's entire apartment back on the orbital station he called home. The main chamber featured a bed that looked like it had been carved from a single massive crystal, furniture that adjusted its configuration as he approached, and walls that displayed slowly rotating star fields with constellations he didn't recognize. A smaller chamber held bathing facilities that made his standard military shower cubicle look like a torture device in comparison. "The palace systems will adapt to your needs," Lyria explained, touching a wall panel that lit up with symbols Marcus couldn't read. "Water temperature, atmospheric composition, lighting, and nutritional requirements can all be adjusted. Simply speak your preferences and the systems will learn your patterns." "This is nicer than anywhere I've ever lived," Marcus admitted, running his hand along furniture that felt like wood but hummed with subtle energy. "If I have to be imprisoned somewhere, at least it's luxurious imprisonment." "You are not imprisoned. You are protected." Lyria moved toward the exit, then paused. "Tomorrow will be difficult. The High Council will not welcome your presence. Some will argue for immediate exile regardless of the ancient law. You will need to be calm, respectful, and prepared for hostility. Can you manage that?" "I've briefed hostile commanders on failed missions," Marcus said. "I think I can handle your council." "My council makes hostile commanders look like friendly schoolchildren." Lyria's expression held what might have been concern or might have been warning. "They have lived centuries longer than you. They will see you as a child playing at politics, an accident that needs to be corrected. Do not give them ammunition against you." "Understood. Be respectful, keep my mouth shut unless spoken to, and try not to accidentally trigger any more ancient laws." Marcus offered a tired smile. "Anything else?" "Yes." Lyria met his eyes. "Be yourself. They will expect calculation and deception from an outsider. Your honesty may be the only advantage we have." She departed before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone in quarters that felt simultaneously luxurious and isolating. He stripped off his damaged flight suit, discovering bruises and cuts he hadn't noticed in the adrenaline of survival. The bathing chamber's facilities proved intuitive, and he spent 20 minutes underwater that adjusted its temperature and pressure to soothe injuries he hadn't realized he had sustained. Clean and exhausted, Marcus collapsed onto the crystal bed, which immediately adjusted to support his body in ways that suggested it had scanned his physiology and optimized for human comfort. The star fields on the walls shifted to display Earth's constellations, and he realized the palace systems had already adapted to his preferences based on his biological responses. Sleep should have been immediate given his exhaustion, but Marcus found his mind racing through the events of the day. Less than 12 hours ago, he had been a simple reconnaissance pilot on a routine mission. Now he was preparing to marry an alien empress to satisfy ancient laws he didn't understand while navigating palace politics that could get him killed more efficiently than any crash landing. And yet, beneath the fear and absurdity, Marcus recognized something else. Curiosity. Interest. The challenge of an impossible situation that required adaptation and survival rather than straightforward combat. This was exactly the kind of scenario that had drawn him to exploration in the first place, even if the specific circumstances were more dramatic than he had imagined. He thought about Lyria, about the sadness in her eyes when she had mentioned the disparity in their lifespans, about the way she had positioned herself between him and armed guards without hesitation. She was trapped in this situation as completely as he was, but she was facing it with dignity and pragmatism rather than panic or resentment. Marcus made a decision then, lying in the darkness of alien quarters on a planet that shouldn't exist. If he was going to be bound to this woman by ancient laws and political necessity, he would at least try to make the best of an impossible situation. He would learn their customs, respect their culture, and do whatever was necessary to survive. And maybe, just maybe, he could help Lyria navigate the political complications his presence had created. Dawn came too quickly, announced by the palace systems gradually brightening the quarters in simulation of natural sunrise. Marcus woke to find fresh clothing laid out, garments that looked like a fusion of Valkyrie formal wear and practical military attire. The fit was perfect, suggesting the palace systems had scanned him thoroughly while he slept. A soft chime announced a visitor. Marcus opened the door to find not Lyria but an elderly Valkyrie male whose pointed ears were adorned with so many ceremonial piercings that they clinked softly when he moved. His robes were marked with symbols that Marcus's translator identified as academic and religious significance. "I am Keeper Valen," the elderly Valkyrie said in perfect trade standard. "I have been sent by Her Majesty to prepare you for the High Council presentation and to begin your education in Valkyrie customs. We have approximately 4 hours before you must appear before the Council. That is barely enough time to teach you the most basic protocols, but it will have to suffice. May I enter?" Marcus stepped aside, gesturing welcome. "I'm a fast learner when my survival depends on it." "Good. You will need to be." Valen moved into the quarters with the careful precision of extreme age. "Let me be direct, Lieutenant Chin. The situation you have triggered is unprecedented in modern Valkyrie history. The ancient law of chamber bonding has not been invoked for over 3,000 years. Most of my people believe it should remain a historical curiosity rather than an active legal requirement. But Empress Lyria says it's absolute," Marcus said. "No exceptions. The law is indeed absolute. Its invocation is what some question." Valen settled into a chair that adjusted for his frame. "There are those on the High Council who will argue that you did not truly witness the sacred ritual, that your intrusion was too brief to count, that exceptions can be made for ignorant outsiders. Others will argue that the law itself is archaic and should be overturned. Both paths lead to the same destination, your exile and possibly your execution as a security threat. So my options are marry the Empress or die." Again. Marcus sat across from Valen. "What's the third option nobody's mentioning?" Valen's eyes, still luminous despite his age, studied Marcus with surprising intensity. "The third option is that you complete the bonding ceremony successfully, navigate the political complications with intelligence and grace, and prove to a skeptical population that this union serves Valthra's interests rather than threatening them. It is not an easy path, but it is the only one that results in both you and Her Majesty surviving with honor intact." "No pressure then." Marcus leaned back. "What do I need to know?" For the next 4 hours, Valen subjected Marcus to an intensive education in Valkyrie culture, protocol, and history that made his military briefings look casual by comparison. He learned the proper forms of address for council members, the significance of different ear piercings and ceremonial markings, the history of the chamber bonding law and why it carried such weight in Valkyrie society. More importantly, Valen explained the telepathic aspects of Valkyrie bonding that Marcus had not previously understood. The Valkyrie possessed limited telepathic abilities, primarily used for deep emotional and memory sharing between bonded pairs. The ceremony would establish a permanent link between Marcus and Lyria, allowing them to sense each other's emotional states and, with practice, share thoughts and memories directly. Will it work with a human? Marcus asked, touching the translator implant behind his ear. Our neurology is different. Unknown, Valen admitted. There are records of Valkyrie bonding with other telepathic species, but never with humans. Your species is telepathically null according to all standard testing. The bonding may create a one-way connection, or it may fail entirely. Or, given the adaptability your species has demonstrated in other areas, it may work in ways we cannot predict. So I'm going to be a test case for interspecies telepathic bonding, Marcus said. Added to the list of unexpected achievements on this mission. Your humor in the face of uncertainty is very human, Valen observed. Try to maintain that quality before the High Council. They will expect you to be nervous or calculating. Simple honesty may disarm them more effectively than any political strategy. When Valen finally declared Marcus as prepared as time allowed, palace guards arrived to escort him to the council chambers. These were different guards from the previous night, their armor marked with symbols Valen had identified as elite ceremonial protection. They treated Marcus with cold courtesy, neither hostile nor welcoming, simply professional in their duties. The council chambers occupied the highest point of the palace, a vast circular room with walls of transparent crystal that offered views of Valthra's landscape in all directions. The floor was inlaid with precious metals forming patterns that Valen had explained represented Valkyrie astronomical knowledge going back millennia. And arranged in a semicircle facing the entrance were 12 seats occupied by individuals who radiated authority and barely concealed hostility. Lyria sat in the central elevated seat, her position literally and figuratively above the other council members. She was dressed in formal robes that seemed to be woven from liquid starlight, her pointed ears adorned with crystals that caught the morning sun and threw rainbows across the chamber. She looked every inch the Empress, and the contrast between this figure of power and the vulnerable woman Marcus had accidentally encountered in her bathing chamber was stark. The High Council recognizes Lieutenant Marcus Chin of Earth, Lyria announced, her voice carrying formal weight that echoed through the chamber. He stands before us under my personal protection, summoned to address matters of ancient law and imperial decree. Marcus stepped forward, using the formal posture and measured steps Valen had drilled into him. He stopped at the precise distance from the council that protocol demanded and performed the gesture of respect that acknowledged their authority without suggesting subservience. Every eye in the chamber tracked his movements, looking for mistakes or signs of disrespect. Lieutenant Chin, spoke a council member whose ceremonial markings identified him as High Chancellor. His voice carried the weight of extreme age and absolute certainty. You stand accused of no crime, for your actions were born of ignorance rather than malice. However, your presence creates complications that threaten the stability of our society. Explain how you came to violate the sacred chamber of our Empress. Marcus had prepared for this moment, rehearsing his explanation with Valen's guidance. But standing before 12 pairs of luminous eyes that had witnessed centuries of history, all his preparation felt inadequate. So he did what had served him best throughout his military career. He told the truth simply and directly. I crashed on Valthra Prime after my ship was caught in an electromagnetic anomaly. I sought shelter in what I thought was an abandoned structure. I was looking for communication equipment to signal for rescue. I entered a room I thought might contain such equipment without realizing it was private chambers or that anyone was inside. The moment I understood my mistake, I attempted to apologize and leave. That's when Empress Lyria informed me of the ancient law my ignorance had triggered. A convenient story, said another council member, this one female with silver hair that fell past her shoulders like a waterfall of light. You expect us to believe you accidentally found your way through palace security, navigated complex corridors, and happened upon the Empress's private chambers by pure chance? I expect you to believe what happened because it's the truth, Marcus said, keeping his tone respectful but firm. I'm a reconnaissance pilot, not a spy or assassin. I have no political agenda, no hidden motives, and no desire to create problems for your people. I simply made a series of poor decisions under crisis conditions that led to an unfortunate situation. Poor decisions that now bind you to our Empress through ancient law, the High Chancellor said. How convenient for a human to gain such status through alleged accident. Convenient? Marcus let some of his genuine frustration show. With respect, High Chancellor, there is nothing convenient about crash landing on a quarantine planet, being threatened with execution for an honest mistake, and being forced into marriage with someone I just met. If I had wanted to gain status, I would have chosen a method that didn't involve catastrophic system failure and potential death. Several council members shifted in their seats, and Marcus caught what might have been approval flickering across a few faces. Lyria remained motionless in her elevated seat, but something in her eyes suggested she was pleased with his response. "The law is clear," Lyria said, her voice cutting through the murmuring that had started among the council. Lieutenant Chin witnessed the sacred chamber ritual. Whether through accident or design is immaterial. The ancient law demands bonding or exile. Those are the only options our ancestors provided. "Then perhaps," said an older council member whose ears bore more piercings than any other, "it is time to acknowledge that a law written 3,000 years ago may not serve our modern needs. The chamber bonding law was created in an era when our people rarely encountered outsiders. It was never intended to apply to situations like this. The law does not specify intent," another council member argued. "It specifies action. The sacred ritual was witnessed by an outsider. That is the fact before us." The debate continued, council members arguing legal interpretation with the kind of passionate intensity that suggested this was about far more than Marcus's specific situation. He realized he was watching a proxy battle over larger questions of tradition versus progress, isolation versus integration with the greater galaxy. Lyria let them argue for several minutes before speaking again, her voice carrying harmonics that commanded instant silence. "The High Council may debate legal philosophy at length once this immediate crisis is resolved. But we do not have the luxury of extended deliberation. The ancient law specifies that bonding must occur within 3 rotations of the witnessed ritual. We have less than 2 rotations remaining. I ask now for a formal vote. Does this council recognize the validity of the ancient chamber bonding law as it applies to Lieutenant Chen and myself?" The vote was called, and Marcus watched as each council member indicated their position through gestures he had learned meant acceptance or rejection. The final tally was 7 in favor of recognizing the law, 5 against. A slim majority, but legally sufficient according to the protocols Valen had explained. "The law is recognized," Lyria declared. "Lieutenant Chin and I will undergo the bonding ceremony tomorrow at sunset. The ceremony will be conducted according to traditional protocols with appropriate witnesses. This council is dismissed." The council members rose, several of them casting dark looks at Marcus as they departed. But the High Chancellor remained, approaching Lyria with the familiarity of long acquaintance. "You are making a mistake, Your Majesty," he said quietly, though not so quietly that Marcus couldn't hear. "This human will be gone in a lifetime's heartbeat. You condemn yourself to centuries of grief for the sake of ancient law that should have been updated millennia ago." "Perhaps," Lyria replied. "Or perhaps the ancient law exists precisely for moments like this, to remind us that fate and choice are not always distinct. Thank you for your counsel, High Chancellor. As always, your concern for my well-being is noted and appreciated." The Chancellor departed, leaving Lyria and Marcus alone in the vast chamber. She descended from her elevated seat with fluid grace, her formal robes shifting like liquid around her. "That went better than I feared," she said, the formal tone dropping from her voice. "You handled yourself well." Several council members were impressed despite their disapproval of the situation. "I just told the truth," Marcus said. "Valen suggested it might be my best strategy. Valen is wise beyond his already considerable years." Lyria moved to the transparent walls, gazing out at the landscape. "Tomorrow at sunset, we will undergo the bonding ceremony. It will be intense. The telepathic connection can be overwhelming even for Valkyrie pairs. For you, with no natural telepathic ability, it may be painful or disorienting. I've crashed a spaceship and survived." Marcus joined her at the window. "I think I can handle telepathic bonding. We shall see." Lyria turned to face him, and her expression held something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Curiosity perhaps, or maybe a strange kind of hope. "The ceremony will create a permanent link between us. We will sense each other's emotional states, share memories if we choose, understand each other in ways that transcend language. It is intimate in a way that physical bonding is not. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus considered the question seriously. Was he prepared to be mentally linked to an alien empress he had known for less than a day? To potentially share thoughts and memories with someone whose life experience spanned a century? The honest answer was no. He wasn't prepared. But preparation had stopped being relevant the moment his ship had entered that electromagnetic storm. "I'm prepared to try," he said finally. "That's the best I can offer. Then it will have to be enough." Lyria's hand moved to her ear, touching one of the crystals there. "I need to meet with my advisors and begin preparations. Valen will continue your education and prepare you for the ceremony. Try to rest when you can. Tomorrow will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine." She departed, leaving Marcus alone in the council chamber with its view of triple moons and alien landscape. He stood there for a long moment, processing everything that had happened, everything that was about to happen. Then he turned to find Valen waiting patiently at the chamber entrance. "Come, Lieutenant," Valen said. "We have much to discuss about the ceremony itself. The telepathic bonding requires preparation, meditation, and an understanding of what you may experience. And there are practical matters as well. You will need ceremonial attire, which must be custom fabricated. You will need to fast for 12 hours before the ritual to purify your system. And you will need to learn the ceremonial responses, though your translator will assist with pronunciation." Marcus followed Valen back through the palace corridors, his mind already racing ahead to what the ceremony would involve. "Valen, can I ask you something? You've lived a long time, seen a lot of things. Do you think this bonding is a mistake?" Valen was quiet for a moment, his aged features thoughtful. "I have lived 230 years. I have witnessed 3 empresses rule our people. I have seen wars and peace, isolation and contact with other species, tradition upheld and tradition discarded. And in all that time, I have learned that what appears to be mistake often reveals itself as necessity in hindsight." "That's not exactly a direct answer," Marcus observed. "No, it is not." Valen smiled slightly. "But it is an honest one. I do not know if this bonding is mistake or fate, Lieutenant Chin. I know only that you and our Empress face it with more courage and grace than many bonded pairs who had years to prepare. That speaks well of both of you regardless of how this story ends." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus learned ceremonial phrases in ancient Valthyri that his tongue struggled to form correctly. He was measured for ceremonial robes by palace artificers who worked with fabrics that seemed to be grown rather than woven. He meditated under Valen's guidance, attempting to prepare his mind for telepathic contact despite having no idea what that actually meant for a telepathically null human. As the day wore into evening, Marcus found himself alone in his quarters, staring out at triple moons rising over alien landscape. Tomorrow he would undergo a ceremony that would bind him permanently to an empress he had known for barely a day. The rational part of his mind still screamed that this was insane, that he should be looking for escape routes and rescue options rather than preparing for marriage. But another part, the part that had led him to join exploration services in the first place, recognized this as exactly the kind of impossible situation that defined his life. He had always been drawn to the unknown, to challenges that required adaptation rather than straightforward solutions. This was simply a more extreme version of what he had always chosen. A chime announced a visitor. Marcus opened the door to find Lyria standing there, no longer in formal robes but wearing simple attire that made her look less like an empress and more like someone seeking a moment of peace. "I should not be here," she said without preamble. "It violates protocols for the bonded pair to meet privately before the ceremony. But I found myself unable to sleep, and I thought perhaps you might be experiencing similar difficulties." "Sleep seems unlikely," Marcus admitted, stepping aside to let her enter. "I keep trying to process everything that's happening, and my brain just keeps returning to the fact that less than 48 hours ago, I was worried about fuel efficiency and navigation coordinates." Lyria moved to the window, her silhouette framed by moonlight. "I have been Empress for 30 years. I was prepared for that role from childhood, trained in diplomacy and protocol and the weight of duty. But nothing prepared me for this. For making decisions that will affect not just my reign but my entire existence beyond it." Marcus joined her at the window. "The High Chancellor mentioned you condemning yourself to centuries of grief. Because I'll be gone and you'll still have most of your life ahead of you." "He is correct," Lyria said quietly. "Even if this bonding proves successful, even if we manage to build something meaningful from this accident, you will age and die while I remain. I will carry the memory of you for 7 centuries after you are gone. That is the cost of this choice." "Then why make it?" Marcus asked. "Your Empress. You could probably find a way around the ancient law if you really wanted to. Exile might be politically complicated, but it's not necessarily death. Why commit to something that guarantees you pain?" Lyria was silent for a long moment, her luminous eyes fixed on something beyond the window. When she spoke, her voice held layers of meaning Marcus was only beginning to understand. Because the alternative is to let fear dictate my choices. Because ancient laws exist for reasons our ancestors understood even if we have forgotten them. Because... She hesitated, then continued, because in the brief time I have known you, Marcus Chin, you have treated me as a person rather than a position. You have shown concern for my well-being alongside your own. You have faced impossible circumstances with humor and honesty rather than calculation. And I find myself curious about what might develop if we approach this bonding with genuine effort rather than mere obligation. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name but recognized as significant. I can't promise I'll be a good husband by your cultural standards. I don't know your customs well enough. I'll make mistakes constantly. I can promise the same, Lyria said, turning to face him. I have no experience with humans. I do not understand your cultural references or your limited lifespan perspective. I will undoubtedly offend you through ignorance more often than I would wish. But perhaps we can learn together. Perhaps this accident that brought you to my chamber was the universe's way of teaching us both something we needed to know. That's a very philosophical take on me crashing your bath time, Marcus said, and was rewarded with a sound that might have been a laugh. You reduce everything to its most basic absurdity, Lyria observed. I think I am beginning to appreciate that quality. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching triple moons cast overlapping shadows across alien landscape. Marcus found himself thinking about the ceremony tomorrow, about the telepathic bond that would link them permanently, about the strange path his life had taken from simple reconnaissance pilot to consort of an alien empress. Lyria, he said finally, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever this bonding creates between us, I want you to know I'm going into it with honest intentions. I'm not trying to use you or your position. I'm just trying to survive an impossible situation while causing minimum damage to everyone involved. I know, Lyria said softly. That is why I believe this bonding may succeed despite all the reasons it should fail. We are both prisoners of circumstance, but we face our imprisonment with integrity. That is more than many freely chosen bonds can claim. She moved toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow at sunset, we will undergo the ceremony in the Chamber of Stars. It is the oldest part of the palace, built by my ancestors when they first learned to shape stone with technology. The ceremony will begin with ritual cleansing, continue through the exchange of vows, and culminate in the telepathic bonding itself. That final stage. I cannot prepare you for it, Marcus. No words can describe what it feels like to open your mind to another consciousness. I'll manage, Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. I've survived worse. Have you? Lyria's expression held genuine curiosity. Have you truly experienced anything that compares to having another mind touch yours, see your memories, understand your fears and hopes as intimately as you understand them yourself? No, Marcus admitted. But I've always been good at adapting to the unexpected. It's kind of my specialty. Then I hope your specialty serves us both well tomorrow. Lyria departed, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the triple moons and the growing certainty that his life had just taken a turn into territory no amount of military training could have prepared him for. Sleep eventually came, fitful and filled with dreams of electromagnetic storms and glowing eyes and chambers filled with starlight. Marcus woke before dawn to find ceremonial robes laid out in his quarters, fabric that seemed to hold captured moonlight woven with patterns that shifted when he looked at them directly. Valen arrived shortly after to guide him through pre-ceremony preparations. Ritual bathing in water infused with minerals that made his skin tingle. Meditation exercises designed to calm his mind and prepare it for telepathic contact. The application of ceremonial markings using pigments that Valen explained would help channel the telepathic energies during bonding. You are as prepared as time allows, Valen said finally, studying Marcus with critical eyes. The ceremony will be witnessed by the High Council and representatives from all major Valkyrie houses. They will be looking for any sign of weakness or insincerity. Maintain your composure regardless of what you experience during the bonding. Can you do that? I once had to deliver a mission failure report to an admiral while my ship was literally on fire around me, Marcus said, adjusting the ceremonial robes that felt both comfortable and alien against his skin. I think I can maintain composure through a wedding ceremony. This is not merely a wedding ceremony, Valen corrected. This is a fundamental joining of two consciousness. The intensity may be beyond your capacity to control. Then I'll do my best and hope my best is sufficient, Marcus replied. That's all I can offer. The sun was setting as palace guards arrived to escort Marcus to the Chamber of Stars. They led him through corridors he hadn't seen before, older sections of the palace where technology gave way to pure craftsmanship, where walls were carved with scenes from Valkyrie history dating back millennia. Other witnesses were already gathering, flowing toward the chamber in a steady stream of formal robes and ceremonial jewelry. The Chamber of Stars exceeded anything Marcus had imagined. The ceiling was a perfect hemisphere of transparent crystal that showed the sky in transition from day to night, triple moons already visible against deepening purple. The walls were lined with precious metals arranged in patterns that matched actual star charts, and the floor was inlaid with crystals that pulsed with internal light in rhythm with something Marcus couldn't identify. Lyria was already present, standing at the chamber's center in robes that seemed woven from starlight itself. Her pointed ears were adorned with ceremonial crystals that caught the fading sun and threw rainbows across the assembled witnesses. She looked ethereal, untouchable, more artwork than person. And when her luminous eyes found Marcus across the chamber, he saw in them the same nervousness he felt beneath his own composed exterior. Valen guided Marcus to his position facing Lyria, separated by a space marked with symbols his translator identified as representing unity and joining. The witnesses arranged themselves in a circle around the chamber's perimeter, several hundred Valkyrie whose combined attention created weight that pressed against Marcus like physical force. An elderly female Valkyrie, even more heavily adorned with ceremonial piercings than Valen, stepped forward into the space between Marcus and Lyria. Her voice carried harmonics that made the crystals in the floor resonate in sympathy. "We gather to witness a bonding unprecedented in modern memory," she announced in ancient Valkyrie that Marcus's translator struggled to parse. "An empress of the Crimson Throne and a human of the Blue World, brought together by fate and ancient law. Let all present bear witness to this union and recognize its validity under the laws that have governed our people since the first moon rose over Valthera." The ceremony began with ritual cleansing, attendants bringing forward bowls of water drawn from sacred springs. Marcus and Lyria each dipped their hands in the water, then touched foreheads in a gesture Valen had explained represented the coming mental union. Lyria's skin felt warm against his, and Marcus thought he detected a faint tremor in her fingers that suggested she was just as nervous as he was. Vows followed, Marcus repeating phrases in ancient Valkyrie that his tongue mangled despite his best efforts. Lyria spoke her vows with perfect clarity, words about moons and tides and orbits that endured across centuries. The ceremonial officiant presented them with resonance bands, crystalline rings that pulsed with internal light. Marcus slipped one onto Lyria's finger, surprised by how warm the crystal felt, while she did the same for him. The bands immediately began to glow brighter, and Marcus felt an odd tingling sensation where the crystal touched his skin. "The resonance bands are attuned," the officiant announced. "Let the minds now join as the hands have joined. Let consciousness touch consciousness. Let the bond be formed that cannot be broken." Lyria stepped closer, and Marcus suddenly understood that this was the moment everything had been building toward. The telepathic bonding itself. Lyria's hands came up to frame his face, her fingers cool against his cheeks, her luminous eyes holding his with intensity that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "Open your mind," she whispered. "Do not resist. Let me in." Marcus had no idea how to open his mind to telepathic contact. He had no natural telepathic ability, no experience with mental communication beyond talking to himself during long solo flights. But he tried to relax, to let go of his instinctive defenses, to simply be present in the moment. And then Lyria's consciousness touched his, and nothing in his life had prepared him for what that felt like. It was like being suddenly aware of a new sense he had never known existed. Lyria's presence in his mind was distinct, foreign, unmistakably other, yet somehow already familiar. He felt her nervousness mirroring his own, her hope tangled with fear, her curiosity about what this bonding would create. And beneath all that, deeper layers of memory and emotion that stretched back across a century of existence. Marcus gasped, and he felt Lyria gasp in the same moment as the connection deepened. Memories flooded between them, not linear or organized but fragmentary and intense. He saw Lyria as a child learning to read ancient texts, as a young woman accepting the weight of the crown, as an empress making decisions that affected millions while feeling desperately alone in her authority. And he knew she was seeing his memories with equal clarity, his childhood on Earth, his military training, his years of solo cargo runs, the loneliness he had carried like a familiar companion. The intensity increased, the boundary between their minds becoming increasingly blurred. Marcus felt panic rising, fear that he was losing himself in the vastness of Lyria's centuries-long consciousness. But then he felt her fear mirroring his, Her own panic at touching a mind so different from any Valkyrie she had known, burning bright and intense and impossibly brief by her standards of time. "Stay with me," Lyria's voice echoed in his mind, not in words but in pure meaning. "Do not be afraid. We anchor each other." And Marcus understood then what the bonding truly meant. They were not merging into a single consciousness. They were becoming two distinct minds with a permanent bridge between them, able to sense and share and understand while remaining fundamentally themselves. The panic faded, replaced by wonder at this new way of experiencing another person. Images and sensations continued to flow between them. Marcus felt Lyria's grief at her mother's abdication, the weight of taking the throne so young. And he knew she felt his pride at earning his pilot's license, the freedom he had found in the vastness of space. They shared fears and hopes and dreams across the vast gulf of their different species, and found unexpected commonalities beneath the surface differences. The crystalline floor pulsed brighter, the resonance bands glowing with intensity that made them visible even through the fabric of their ceremonial robes. The assembled witnesses watched in silence, and Marcus distantly realized that this bonding was far more intense than most, the telepathic connection between human and Valkyrie creating effects that even the ancient ceremony hadn't anticipated. And then, at the peak of intensity, Marcus felt something else. A third presence in the telepathic link, faint but unmistakably there. Not Lyria and not himself. Something external trying to observe or maybe influence the bonding. Before he could identify it further, Lyria's consciousness surged protectively, shielding them both, and the external presence retreated. But Marcus had felt it clearly. Someone or something had been attempting to access their telepathic bond during the ceremony itself. And from the spike of alarm he felt through the link, Lyria had recognized the intrusion for the threat it represented. The bonding reached its conclusion, the intensity gradually fading until Marcus and Lyria stood facing each other in the Chamber of Stars, their minds still linked but no longer overwhelmed by the connection. Lyria's hands remained framing his face, and Marcus realized his own hands had come up to rest on her shoulders, anchoring them to each other through the intensity of the joining. "The bond is formed," the officiant announced, her voice seeming to come from very far away. "Witnessed and validated under ancient law. Let all present recognize Empress Lyria and consort Marcus Chin as bonded pair under Valkyrie tradition. The ceremony is complete." The witnesses began to disperse, filing out of the Chamber of Stars with the quiet dignity of people who had witnessed something historically significant. But Marcus barely noticed them. His attention was focused entirely on Lyria, on the new awareness of her presence in the back of his mind, on the way he could now sense her emotions as clearly as his own, and on the shared knowledge that something had tried to interfere with their bonding, something that suggested this forced marriage was part of a larger plot they had only begun to uncover. "We need to talk," Lyria said aloud, her voice steady despite the turmoil Marcus could feel through their link. "Privately. Now." She led him from the Chamber of Stars through corridors that seemed to reconfigure around them, taking paths that Marcus suspected were known only to the Imperial family. They entered a room he hadn't seen before, smaller than the formal chambers but more heavily shielded, the walls humming with technology designed to prevent surveillance. "You felt it too," Lyria said the moment the door sealed behind them. It wasn't a question. Through their bond, she knew he had experienced the same intrusion she had. "Someone attempted to access our telepathic link during the bonding. That should be impossible. The ceremony creates a connection so intimate that external interference requires technology we haven't developed and mental disciplines that take decades to learn. Unless someone knew exactly when and how to strike," Marcus said, his military training kicking in as he analyzed the threat. "The electromagnetic storm that damaged my ship. Your sudden decision to come to this temple for solitary study. My inability to read the door signs that led me to your chamber. What if none of it was coincidence?" Through their bond, Marcus felt Lyria's realization crystallizing. "You think someone engineered this entire situation? Brought you here specifically to trigger the ancient bonding law? I think we need to consider the possibility." Marcus began pacing, his mind racing through tactical scenarios. That electromagnetic storm intensified with impossible speed. My ship's systems failed in ways that don't match any natural phenomenon. I crashed exactly where I needed to crash to reach this palace. And I found my way to your specific chambers through corridors I shouldn't have been able to navigate. But why? Lyria moved to a wall panel, calling up displays that showed palace security systems. What would anyone gain from forcing this bonding? Political destabilization, Marcus suggested. You said there are factions that oppose you. What better way to undermine your authority than to force you into a scandalous marriage with an outsider? The High Council vote was barely in your favor. If opposition grows, they could move to depose me, claiming I'm unfit to rule due to judgment compromised by inappropriate bonding. Lyria's expression hardened. And with you as my bonded consort, they could argue that human interests now influence imperial policy. It's brilliant and devastating. Through their link, Marcus felt her fear and anger mixing with determination. And he felt something else, a recognition that they were stronger together than apart, that the bond forced upon them might be the very thing that allowed them to survive the conspiracy. We need evidence, Marcus said. We need to find who created that electromagnetic storm, who sabotaged my ship's navigation systems. We need to identify the external presence that tried to access our bond during the ceremony. And we need to do it quietly, Lyria added. If we accuse council members without proof, it will only accelerate whatever plan is in motion. We need to appear compliant, unaware of the manipulation while we investigate. Marcus felt a smile crossing his face despite the danger. You know what? I'm actually good at this. Military intelligence was part of my training before I went into reconnaissance. I know how to gather evidence and identify threats. And I know palace politics and where information might be hidden. Through their bond, Marcus felt Lyria's mood shifting from fear toward something like excitement. We make a more formidable team than whoever arranged this bargain for. They gave us a permanent telepathic link, Marcus pointed out. That was probably not their smartest move. We can coordinate without anyone overhearing. We can share information instantaneously. Show me, Lyria said. Through their bond, Marcus felt her curiosity mixing with the beginning of genuine partnership. Think something at me. Let's test the practical applications of this connection. Marcus focused his thoughts, forming a clear mental image of his crashed ship and the specific damage patterns he had observed. Through the bond, he felt Lyria receiving the information, understanding it with a completeness that words could never achieve. I see it, Lyria said aloud, wonder coloring her voice. The damage is not consistent with electromagnetic interference. Those scoring patterns on the hull suggest directed energy weapons. Your ship was attacked, not damaged by natural phenomena. And I can feel your knowledge of palace technology, Marcus replied, equally amazed. You're thinking about energy signatures that match what I observed. You know who has access to weapons that could create those patterns. They stared at each other, the implications of their linked minds becoming clear. The conspiracy that had brought them together had inadvertently created exactly what their enemy should have feared most. Two minds working in perfect coordination, combining human tactical thinking with Valkyrie political knowledge and centuries of experience. We're going to find who did this, Lyria said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. We're going to uncover their plan and stop it. And then we're going to make them regret ever thinking they could manipulate an empress of Valthera. I like the way you think, Marcus said. Through their bond, he felt Lyria's fierce determination matching his own. When do we start? Now. Lyria moved toward a concealed panel Marcus hadn't noticed. There are archives only the Imperial family can access. Information about past conspiracies, old alliances, individuals who have opposed my rule. We start there and follow whatever leads emerge. As they began their investigation, working together with the ease of long partnership despite having known each other for barely 2 days, Marcus reflected on the absurdity of his situation. He had crashed on a forbidden planet, accidentally triggered ancient marriage laws, and bonded telepathically with an alien empress. By any reasonable standard, his life had become completely insane. But standing in a shielded room with Lyria, their minds linked in permanent connection, beginning to unravel a conspiracy that threatened them both, Marcus realized something surprising. He wouldn't change any of it. The crash, the forced bonding, the impossible circumstances, all of it had led him exactly where the universe apparently wanted him to be. Fighting alongside an empress whose strength matched his own, whose mind complemented his perfectly, whose presence in the back of his consciousness already felt natural rather than intrusive. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever threats they would face, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that they would face them together. The electromagnetic storm that had brought him to Valthera continued to rage beyond the palace walls, unnatural and persistent. But inside, in a shielded room where two bonded minds worked as one, a different kind of storm was beginning to gather. And those who had engineered this situation were about to discover that humans and Valkyrie together were far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The real story was just beginning.